Hot on the heels of Gemini 3 coming out, Claude decided to release Claude Opus 4.5, the latest in their highest model, the highest reasoning model for all of us. And I've gotten a chance to play with it a little bit and compare it, and I really think that it is so neck and neck that I actually reached out to you guys to see what you thought and to get a little bit of an opinion about which one was better. And the results are in, as well as my own thoughts. So in this video, we're going to go through all of that and hopefully ultimately decide which one is better for authors, especially if you enjoy using AI for the writing process. So I've done a couple of things here. For one, I used one of my automations to write a chapter, the opening chapter of an urban fantasy book. And I wrote one version of it with Claude and one version of it with Gemini, and then decided to show that to the public so they can read through it, see what they think, and vote on which one they think is better without knowing who wrote what, right? So I had initially option one. You can see a bunch of people here still reading this, and I would love to give this a little bit more time, but I got to film this video. So there's this one, option one. Then there was option two. Now, unfortunately, option one is written in first person, and option two, due to a mistake on my part, was written in third person, and I didn't realize my mistake until too late, and a lot of people had already seen this. So I did a redo on option two and included it here. This one is in first person. I just made a little note here that the original was written in third person. So unfortunately, that does kind of skew the results a little bit, because there were a lot of people who voted on this reading the first person and the third person rather than both written in first person. But hopefully we'll still be able to get some valuable data out of that. And I'll link this down below so you can go there and read through the two options. I would recommend reading through option one and then option two that's in first person, and giving me your thoughts down below on which one you think is better. Although I am going to spoil which one was written by which model here in a second. But in addition to all of this, I also ran a lot of my standard test prompts that I run many models through and came up with all of these results. So we're not just talking about prose here, we're talking about log lines, outlines, basic prose, a more complicated prose, a dialogue scene, as well as editing and a really poor quality scene to see if we can make it better. And then also writing ad headlines and doing email newsletter copy and writing an SEO article. So before we actually get into the results of this chapter and which one did better, I'd like to run through each of these so far and just give you my thoughts on which one performed better. So we'll start here with the logline prompt. And for this one, I can pretty much say that Gemini was better. The ones I was getting out of Claude 4.5 Opus were pretty generic and pretty typical of what I've gotten in the past from this prompt from a lot of other models. A lot of just very overused tropes and things like that. Like this one, a young cartographer hired to map the edges of a dying world learns that the world isn't dying but shrinking and must reach the source of the destruction before her homeland vanishes, before the world is consumed by a grieving god trying to erase the memory of his dead wife. All right, so there's like a couple just random ideas sort of thrown together there without much of anything interesting to make it make sense. And also, like, I've seen this fantasy cartographer thing here all the time. I think it's probably pulling that from what's her name's books that had a Netflix series. Yeah, so a lot of stuff like that. Nothing particularly groundbreaking compared to what I've seen in the past. Gemini 3, on the other hand, was better. Was it perfect? No, but it was better. And some of it was almost a little humorous, which isn't quite what I was going for. But I did think that the story ideas were a little bit more interesting when I would read them. And to be fair, the cartographer showed up here as well. To give you an idea of what I mean when I said there's a little bit more humor, I'll give you this one. A highly educated goblin raised by human scholars must return to his feral, mud-dwelling tribe to unite them against a threat that eats magic, battling centuries of prejudice and his own family's desire to eat his shoes. So I actually thought this was a pretty decent seed of an idea to get started with, but there's definitely this is definitely more of a comedic fantasy than anything else. But then there's others like this one. A scholar from a utopian future travels back to the golden age of heroes only to realize the legendary heroes were actually incompetent drunks, requiring him to secretly fix their mistakes to ensure history happens as it was written. And there's a number of others that I just thought were decent ideas, and at the very least, they got me thinking more than the Claude ones did. So I do think Gemini wins out here, although it was very close. Next is the outline test prompt, and let's take a look at what Claude gave us. Now, first of all, I actually need to zoom out here. Claude gave us way more detail. So this is a whole chapter's worth of the outline, and you can see it's got everything from like the setting, the opening image, events, purpose. And chapter 1 is, oh gosh. All right, there's all of chapter 1 right there. Crazy amount of detail. And looking through it, it does appear to be pretty good overall. And I think Claude actually did a really excellent job outlining this story, given that I just give it a very small concept. I don't really give it that many plot details because I want to see what it comes up with and does it make sense. And it did, and I thought it was good. And there was also lots and lots of detail, which I do appreciate. However, I don't necessarily want a whole lot of detail in my outline. Now, you could fix this with a simple prompt, but I noticed going to Gemini, the amount of detail it gave me for each one was a lot less and a lot more succinct. So there's the prologue, there's chapter 1 right there. There's chapter 2. And overall, I thought both were pretty good. They just did things very differently. But as far as the whole world sort of making sense and the story making sense over the entire thing, it's too long for me to actually read it to you. I do think that they both did pretty much equal. However, I am going to give the edge to Claude 4.5 Opus here. Because if we scroll down to the bottom, it gave me actually some interesting things here at the end. It closed out the thing. And by the way, this was an enormous outline. It was working on this for like 10 minutes. But it gave me this little appendices thing, like a character summary. Lathan, the protagonist, from validation-seeking prince to self-assured leader. It gave me their character, their role in the story, and the arc, which I did not ask for. Varric Thorn, antagonist, revealed as the Zoloth agent and true architect of the conspiracy. Kira, B-story love interest, challenges Lathan to find his own truth. And it has, every one of these has like a role in the story and a little bit of an arc that it mentioned there. It also told me what this theme was, the theme statement, which was really cool. And then it also gave me some ideas for a series setup. Like what if I wanted to make more books after this? It gave me that. So I actually thought that was really interesting and a great sort of analytical bonus on top of what it's given me so far. The only thing I will caveat here is, other than the names that I put in the concept, like Lathan, these are very AI common names. Aldrich, Kira, Varric Thorn I see in everything. Mira, I've seen almost all of these, but that's not really unique to Claude. Gemini does the exact same thing. In fact, I'm pretty sure there was an Alara here somewhere in the Gemini version. We got a Kaelin, that one's pretty common, or Kael, Kael. So yeah, overall, both of them did okay. I think you would be absolutely fine going with either. I do find that Gemini is a little bit more succinct, so if that's what you prefer in your outlines, which I generally do because it's harder to fix a more fleshed out outline. So I'd rather have a more succinct outline so I could fix it up and then flesh it out a little bit more. So let's move on to the prose. And this was where things got really interesting because I've been using Gemini 3. Well, let me back up. Claude 4.1 Opus is one that I've used quite heavily, and I've used it to write an entire, in total, about 2 books worth of content. I've used 4.1 Opus for that. And so I got really used to the sound of 4.1 Opus in my head. And then I switched to Gemini 3 recently and have been using that for a lot of my stuff. I haven't worked with it as much as I did with Claude 4.1 Opus, but I have been using it quite a bit. And I've been using it in my automations. So now I've tried using 4.5 in my automations and comparing 4.5 to Gemini 3 here with these simple prompts, I actually was quite surprised by what I found. Mainly, if we look, let's start here by looking at Claude 4.5 Opus. Well, we'll skip that paragraph. It's introductory. I'd cut that anyway. Haldred stumbled. His boots, once fine leather reinforced with bronze clasps, standard issue for the Carthan Surveyor Corps, caught on the loose stone, and he pitched forward onto his hands and knees. The impact sent a shock of pain through his already battered body, and for a moment, just a moment, he considered staying down. The dust was almost soft here, almost welcoming. His muscles screamed for rest. His lungs burned with each ragged breath. Get up. He forced himself to his feet, swaying like a drunk. His expedition coat hung in tatters around his shoulders. The proud green and silver threading now barely visible between layers of grime and dried blood, not all of it his own. The pack on his back was empty, long since abandoned of everything but the leather straps that dug into his shoulders. He dropped the surveying equipment first, then the rations, then the bedroll, one by one, mile by mile. He'd shed everything that slowed him down. Everything except the weight of what he'd witnessed. 3 days. It had been 3 days since the expedition had made camp in the shadows of the Thornspire. 13 survivors strong, tasked with mapping the northern passages for the Council of Varlden. 3 days since he'd woken to screaming and the wet sounds of tearing flesh. 3 days since he'd run, leaving behind friends and colleagues whose faces he could no longer bear to remember. All right, I read that last paragraph because that's a very typical thing that I saw working with 4.1 Opus a lot. It would do this thing where it would say like 3 days, and then it would repeat it again, 3 days since, and then again here, 3 days since. That's not a bad literary motif. However, it uses it way too often. And I found myself editing these out quite frequently and found myself getting tired. It's almost like a overly dramatic form of text. And that's going to be a theme here with Claude, I think. Anyway, let's go look at Gemini. In this desolation, a singular speck of motion fought against the inevitable. Haldred stumbled, his boots catching on the protrusion of shale, sending him crashing to his knees. He gasped, the dry air scorching his lungs like inhaled glass, but forced himself upright again with a groan that was half sob. His tunic, once the proud deep indigo of the royal surveyors, hung in tatters, stained with grime, sweat, and the dried blood of men he had called friends. The leather pack on his back bounced rhythmically against his spine, a cruel mocking weight despite its hollowness. The water was gone, the artifacts abandoned, and the expedition, that glorious venture meant to reclaim the old maps, was now reduced to one man hyperventilating in the twilight. He had been running since midday, legs burning with lactic acid, fueled only by the primal terror that chewed at his heels. And if you continue on reading, it's a little bit more of the same. And overall, I actually found for this particular prompt, I think I liked the prose from Claude 4.5 Opus a little better. But this is a dramatic scene. He's being chased by these zombie-like creatures, and so that's the sort of thing that Claude is really, really good at. So I was kind of surprised I didn't like Gemini 3 as much here because I'd really enjoyed Gemini 3 in other contexts, even though there are some AI-isms and things to see there. But let's move on to the next one. It's the same scene, but I give it a lot more detail, as well as instructions to improve the style and stuff like that. And for Claude 4.5 Opus, I noticed that this didn't really make much of a difference. A lot of it's the same kind of dramatic prose. He looked back. They were there. Of course they were there. Scattered across the horizon like a disease spreading through healthy flesh. The figures moved, 24 at least, maybe more. Hard to count when they shifted and jerked the way they did. The unnatural motion that made the eye slide away made the mind want to look anywhere else. That's another thing that I got a lot out of Claude, is this idea, like almost this like cosmic horror Lovecraftian thing where you can't even fathom, you can't even comprehend this thing that you're looking at. It uses the phrase hurt to look at all the time, at least with the kind of stuff that I write. Anyway, and then Gemini 3, he paused only long enough to wipe the grime from his sunken eyes and look back. The horizon rippled. Shapes detached themselves from the twilight, moving with a staccato rhythm that defied natural joints. The hungry. Their gray flesh absorbed the dim light, making them nearly invisible against the slate and granite. One stumbled, limbs flailing like a broken marionette, then snapped upright and continued the pursuit. 24 at least. So the one from Gemini was a little bit more succinct, and it kind of rushed through the scene a little bit more, but I again, I do think that it was improved by adding all the additional context, whereas 4.5 Opus, still very good, kind of didn't change that much. And this kind of goes along with my findings in using Gemini in my automations, because in my automations, I give it lots and lots of info, including a very detailed 6,000 word document that has samples of writing to emulate, as well as a style guide developed from that writing. And I have tested it with multiple style sheets, and it changes dramatically depending on which style sheet and style examples you are using. I've noticed that Claude 4.5 Opus does not quite respond as dynamically to this style information as Gemini 3 does. Now, that's just a slight thing that I've noticed. I may decide to change my mind as I work with these a little bit more, but that's just like what I'm gathering so far from having worked with these models a little bit. I do think Gemini 3 is more responsive to prompts and to examples, style examples, for example, more so than 4.5 Opus is, and more so than 4.1 Opus was. But all in all, they're both doing pretty well in general. So the next prompt is for dialogue, to see how well it does with a dialogue scene. And if we look at some of the dialogue here from 4.1 Opus, we can get a sense for what it looks like. "You've heard then," Store said. It wasn't a question. "Heard?" Lathan's voice cracked like breaking ice. A little bit overdramatic there. "I watched. I was on the wall when they refused to open the gates. A man, a living, breathing man, screamed for help while those things tore him apart, not 30 feet from the sanctuary. That's the second time this month. The second man we've left to die. The law is yours to change." Lathan's fist clenched at his sides. "You are the king. You make the law, or have you forgotten?" Argyll stepped forward, his thin lips curving into something that might have been a smile on a warmer face. "Young prince, the laws exist for reasons beyond the comprehension of those who have not studied them." His voice carried the patient condescension of a tutor addressing a particularly slow child. "Every statute, every protocol regarding the gates, these were written in blood, our ancestors' blood. They exist in the safety of Varlden and everyone within these walls." All right, so that's the dialogue from that, and let's go to Gemini 3. "We listened to him die," Lathan spat, his voice cracking. "He marched to the center of the room, ignoring the protocol of bowing." Nice little detail there. "He was right there, father. His fingers were on the wood of the gate. We could have pulled him in." Store looked down at his son, his expression weary, carved by decades of hard choices. "It is night, Lathan." "He was human. He wasn't one of them," Lathan shouted, the image of the man halted. He'd heard a guard whisper, being torn apart, replaying behind his eyelids. "The archers watched. The people watched. This is the second time this month we've let a traveler be consumed right on our doorstep. The blood hasn't even washed off the cobblestones from the last one." "The law is the law," Store rumbled, his voice deep and resonant, though it lacked the fire Lathan desperately wanted to see. "The gates seal at dusk. For no man, no matter how desperate, are they open, not until the sun bleaches the shadow from the pass." "You are the king!" Lathan gestured wildly, his leather bracers creaking. "You make the laws. If the law demands we stand idle while innocent men are butchered 5 feet from salvation, then the law is rot." "Prince Lathan," Argyll cut in, his voice smooth and oily like polished slate. He clasped his hands inside his sleeves. "Please, your passion does you credit, truly, but you speak from emotion, not wisdom. The laws exist not to punish the traveler, but to preserve the city. If we open the gate for one screaming soul, we invite the hungry in to feast on thousands. Surely you understand the calculus of survival." All right, so they're both, again, very, very good. Like, this is a really, really hard choice. Me, personally, I tend to lean more towards Gemini 3 in this one as far as the dialogue goes, but they are both, they're so neck and neck that it's really hard to choose. Moving on to the editing Prose template. I won't bore you by reading more of this, but you can trust me to say that they were both excellent at this as well. I thought it was very hard for me to decide which one was better. I think maybe I would give the edge to Gemini 3. It changed more and it all still made sense to the point where it felt like it was a redo of the scene. Like I could have just run the same prompt again with a higher quality model and it would have done better. I do think that Gemini 3 does tend to have a really good perspective of the scene as a whole, and as far as the reasoning capabilities to suss out where things should be, the blocking of the scene and all of that. But overall, again, I can't really pick a winner between these two because they were both really good and both did very well. All right, let's look at the add headlines prompt. As far as these ones from Claude 4.5 Opus, these did fine. I didn't think any of these were particularly bad compared to past models, which often get this very badly. Everything the kingdom told him about the outside world was a lie. The truth was far worse. Yeah, that's fine. 3 races want him dead. 1 wants to consume his soul, and he just learned his whole life was a deception. Like this one, the hungry eat flesh, the Zoloth consume souls, his own family, they fed on something far worse. What's more dangerous than a hive mind of thousands? The truth, a dying empire will kill to bury. So yeah, these are all very good variations on the same theme. Let's look at Gemini 3. First of all, Gemini 3 split these into different types of ad headlines. It said, okay, these are the everything you know is a lie hooks. These are the monster/ecosystem hooks, retelling/revenge hooks, and short, punchy curiosity gaps. So that already it is a huge win for Gemini in my book. So let's read one of each of these. They told Prince Lathan the mountain walls were built to keep the monsters out. They lied about who was truly trapped. So this everything you know is a lie hook is the one that pretty much all of the Claude answers were. And this is just as fine as well. And I get that particular everything you know is a lie type of ad headline with most of the models that I run this through. But if we look at the monster/ecosystem mystery hooks, we've got 3 dominant races rule the wastes, but the Zoloth are the ones you shouldn't look at. Here is why. That's a decent hook right there. In the world where everything is a predator, Lathan just realized he's been the bait all along. All right, as far as retelling revenge hooks, we've got the Count of Monte Cristo reimagined in a world of monsters. Who betrayed Lathan and how far will he go to burn them down? Makes sense. And then the short, punchy curiosity gaps. The mountain city wasn't a sanctuary. It was a blindfold. If the zombie plague doesn't get you, the secrets of the North will. Just quick little ones there. 4 races exist in the world. 3 are at war. 1 is lying. I like that one right there. All right, now moving on to the email newsletter prompt. This is another one where both did really, really well. In the past, a lot of models did not do really well with this prompt. I'm looking for a kind of natural email that sounds like I could have written it, right? This is the one from Claude. I'm thrilled to finally share some exciting news. My new epic fantasy novel, The Crown of Hunger, releases on December 21st. This one is deeply personal to me, inspired by the themes of The Count of Monte Cristo. And it basically goes through and does a quick description of the book. And it says, pre-order your copy here. Thank you for being part of this journey. I can't wait for you to meet Lathan and explore this world with him. Warmly, your name. And so it's very brief, which I like. I think most emails should be brief. And if we look at the one from Gemini 3, it's also very similar. It's finally done. I'm thrilled to announce that my novel, The Crown of Hunger, will be released on December 21st. If you love the intricate revenge and betrayal of the Count of Monte Cristo, but crave a brutal, high-stakes epic fantasy setting, this story is for you. Here's a glimpse into the world. And then it also gives us a really brief glimpse into the world. And ends it up with thank you for reading and for your support. Best, your name. And so both did really well here. I can't really put one above the other. As far as I'm concerned, they're tied for this one as well. All right. And last but not least is the SEO super prompt, which I have not yet put into this document. And that's because it's just right here inside of OpenRouter where I was running these tests. So let's look first at Claude. And usually I skim these. Most people skim articles anyway. Just to see how it organizes things and how much white space is there, how scannable is it? That's really what I'm looking for more than anything else. And it looks like it's actually doing a really good job here with Claude Opus. It's got some interesting details here, like Brandon Sanderson wrote 13 novels before getting one published. He attributes much of his development to reading voraciously and analyzing what worked and didn't, and in his books, in the books he consumed. That's a true detail, one that, maybe it pulled it from the research, but I haven't seen any of the models do that before. So this is overall is very good. It's lengthy, which I ask it to be. And overall, yeah, excellent job, Claude 4.5 Opus. All right, so Gemini, which you think that anything coming from Google would be good at producing web articles. One thing I'm noticing here is it's bolding too many keywords, which I don't like. But it is going through the same process here. Yeah, definitely way too many bolded keywords, but it is following the same structure, more or less the same. Let's see how many words each of these is. All right, so Gemini was 2350 words and Claude Opus was 3543. And I asked for 4,000, so Claude definitely got closer to what I wanted with this particular prompt. So I'd say that is a win for Claude in this case. Another thing we need to keep in mind is the cost of these models. So Claude 4.1 Opus was notoriously expensive at $75 per million tokens of output and $15 per million tokens of input. Thankfully, Claude 4.5 Opus has come down significantly in price, but is still more expensive than Gemini 3. So if we look at Claude Opus 4.5, the price that we have here is $5 per million tokens of input and 25 per million tokens of output. That's 1/3 of the price that 4.1 Opus was. So this is definitely a huge improvement on as far as price goes. Especially given that, as far as I'm concerned, the output in its Prose is only slightly better. Not a huge improvement. Definitely some improvement, but not a huge thing. But the fact that it is now 1/3 of the price makes it way more valuable, in my opinion. If we look at Gemini 3, that one is $2 per input price and $12 for the output price, which still means that it is less than half of what Opus 4.5 gives us. So when it comes to value for the price, given that these, in my opinion, are neck and neck in terms of their capabilities, I would still give the edge to Gemini 3 based purely on price alone, because you will get more than twice the amount of work out of it for the same price as using Claude 4.5 Opus. But let's get back to that document where I had people go through and analyze these two scenes. And now I'm not going to read everything for you here because frankly, I want you to actually go through and read the whole chapter to kind of analyze it as a whole. But on the whole, more people liked option 1 than option 2. And I actually found this surprising because I personally liked option 2 better. And just to reveal which one was which, option 1 was Claude 4.5 Opus, and option 2 was Gemini 3. Now, there was that issue where the first version of option 2 was written in third person when I intended for it to be in first person. That wasn't an error on the AI's part. That was an error on my part for giving it the wrong prompt. And going through and rereading the second version of option 2, I still think it's really, really good. And I do feel like it matches the style input and the style examples that I give it more so than the than Claude 4.5 Opus does. But I was going through my groups because I shared this with both my Story Hacker Silver and Gold group, as well as on a post on my YouTube channel, and got some interesting comments from them. And I want to comment on one particular comment that I thought summed up my thoughts really nicely. So this comes from a member of my Story Hacker Silver group, where this person said, it's a tough comparison because the big difference is between first and third person. Yep, I already talked about that. It's hard to tell what comes from the POV change and what comes from the model. I actually like both. Option 1 felt more immediate and detailed, but that sort of storytelling might drag if it's like that for the whole book. Option 2 would be easier and more fun and fast-paced to read. I'd guess option 2 was Gemini, and she was right. There are a lot more feels and internal narrative in 1. If it's just like this in high impact scenes, it would work well, but a whole book with that level of introspection might be too slow. I think option 1 is Claude, and she was right about that too. So this sums up my thoughts on this perfectly. I do think that both of these models are excellent at writing prose, but having worked with the Claude models a lot recently, and not seeing a whole lot of changes in 4.5 compared to 4.1, there are a lot of things that it does that get old after a while. When you're first reading it, you're like, this is amazing. This is just awesome. But as this person pointed out, a whole book with this sort of, she put it immediate and detailed and had a lot of feels and internal narrative, and that it would work for high impact scenes and not for the whole book. I absolutely agree with that, having worked with Claude quite a bit. It's great for those high impact scenes, but maybe not so great for everything else. And I do think that Gemini 3, I think, kind of gets the flair of the character and the dialogue just a little bit better than Claude 4.5 Opus. So I honestly think the best thing to do would actually to be using both in the right circumstances. And I'm going to actually make a modification to my automations so that it can determine, is this a really high impact scene? In which case we should choose the Claude model for that and have it automatically choose Claude 4.5 Opus for that particular scene, and then use Gemini 3 for everything else. And I think this is why I really liked Gemini 3 and its results better than Claude 4.5 Opus, whereas the majority of the people that read these 2 chapters liked the Opus one better. I think it's because it does that sort of dramatic, high impact stuff very, very well. And if that's all you're doing is reading that one scene, it feels amazing and it works. But if you had a whole book with that, it's not so great. And I find that Gemini 3 is just a kind of better overall model. But that's just for me personally, and clearly a lot of people really liked the Claude version. I just think that if you were using that to write in a whole book for you, you would eventually get very tired of the sort of tone that it has, and it would often be like way too just overly dramatic for the needs of most scenes. So those are my final thoughts on Claude 4.5 Opus. It is definitely an amazing tool, and you can't really go wrong with either it or Gemini 3. I think they are practically equal in my mind, but just different and should be used differently and in different circumstances. So I would recommend doing something like what I just said, where you use Claude for the more high impact dramatic scenes and use Gemini for everything else. If you want to learn how to write up to a book a month, if not more, come join my Story Hacker Gold group, where you can get my automations and all of that to write a massive amount of books in a short amount of time. So if that sounds interesting to you, I'll see you down below.